Hi, it's Alistair at Electric Scotland. This is me doing my introduction to my weekly newsletter for October the 12th, 2018. I've just been watching the horrific aftermath of the hurricane in Florida. I mean, one whole town just wiped off the map. That's just extraordinary. Totally extraordinary. So I'm obviously hoping any of our regular visitors Electric Scotland are safe and well. But anyway, there's certainly some big damaging storms around the world these days. Okay, so on to what's happening here at Electric Scotland. Well, I have to say I've been working very hard at trying to come up with a new site search engine. I've been feeling for a time that my PDF files are not being indexed as well as they could be. So I'm trying to get a new search engine in place. But the configuration of it is mind-blowingly difficult, at least for me anyway. I'm trying to get some help from my new hosting company. I mean, in the old days I would have handed it over to Steve and he would have sorted it out, you know, but as Steve's no longer here, I have to try and rely on other folk to help me. I have been working through it. They think they know what might be an issue, but I don't know, we'll see. But if I can get it working, then I think it'll be a much better search engine. After all, the site's all about research at the end of the day. And if you're looking for a reference to a name or a town or something like that, it's very important that we dig into a lot of these PDF files that I have up in the site. And on to the mailing list is the next one. As you probably noticed, I tried to get out the mailing list the other week there. Huge amount of problems with that. I mean, I will say that the database I downloaded from my original one that worked for many years in fact, I didn't notice it, but if someone unsubscribed or wanted off the list, I would just delete them. But what I didn't realize was it still kept their names in a database. Admittedly flagged that, you know, unsubscribed and stuff like that. But when I downloaded what I thought was the net list, excluding these ones that had unsubscribed, I actually got the entire list, including people that had unsubscribed. So, terrible. Anyway, that particular first bash of the mailing list was an issue because I didn't realize it at the time, but it was one of those that you can have it like a forum in a sense, that if you reply to it, your reply would go onto the list and therefore would be sent out to everyone on the list. And of course, guess who gets the bounces from these lists? Me. So I had over 1,000 bounced emails into my personal inbox, and that was a sheer nightmare to try and get rid of. And I also spent a complete day just going through and deleting all those bounced messages off the list. Because the other thing I got was I didn't quite realize it because it was just like getting into a habit that if the email address was bounced, I just deleted it. But then I found later that some of them, in fact, were bounced because the mailing program saw too many bounces coming through and temporarily stopped sending it to some of you. So in fact, some of you that were on the list are probably no longer on the list, I'm sorry to say. And there's not much I can do about that. Other than the new list that I used, at least the new mailing list program that I used last, and I think I sent you a test email, that obviously you can't reply to that list, or if you do it doesn't go anywhere. So I mean, that's fixed that issue. It looks like a more robust program. So I think that's going to work. I got a lot of bounces, but that's because I had built a reputation up very quickly of being a spam site. So I'm hoping, I've emailed a few of these mailing list monitoring programs that It was a mistake, basically, but I've corrected it. And I noticed they did allow some of my emails that were being held to go through. So I'm hoping when I send out this list later today that it will work fine. So we'll keep our fingers crossed. I will say, if you want to go onto our direct list, if you go to our newsletter page, so if you go to electricscotland.com, click on newsletters, on that page you'll see a link to subscribe to our mailing list. And there's also an unsubscribe button there, so if you ever need to unsubscribe, just go there again and hit the unsubscribe, and that will sort that out for you. So I think we're all set up now, but I'll see obviously when I send out this next mailing to you. Keep my fingers crossed it will work. And the other thing that I'm looking at is, because now that basically everything's working on the site, and all programs that weren't working, like our arcade and our community, which you can get to without being a member of the community, is all working again now. And I know some of you really enjoy playing all the wee games that were there. I've always enjoyed playing Mahjong on that one myself. But I noticed that when I joined this For Good Hosting company in Vancouver, one of the scripts they said they had available was Trade Wars. I don't know how many of you are old enough to remember Trade Wars, but I used to have it on my bulletin board service back in the 1990s in Scotland, and it was very popular. It was a multi-user game, and it was going around the galaxy, trading between various ports and planets and stuff like that. Great fun. And when I saw that, I thought I'd really like to put that back for old time's sake, you know. But then apparently there's issues when you're doing games online these days. So the hosting company is saying that maybe I would be better to look at using a separate domain for games. As it happens, I'm no longer using electricscotland.net, so that's one of the things I'm looking into, is whether to build that as a game site. So we'll see. I mean, now that I'm getting everything kind of working again, I can spend time on improving things and making more facilities available again. So we'll see how everything goes. Anyway, that's hopefully a wee bit of an update for you. Now on to the Scottish news stories that I've got for you this week. The first story is, free ports provide an attractive trade opportunity. If only Chequers didn't prevent such an ambitious policy. I will say, the more I look at this Chequers deal and Brexit, the more I'm very despondent. I mean, the reason I voted for Brexit was that I thought it was time we got out into the world and did fabulous trade deals and boosted our influence in the world. And I'm still convinced that's the way forward. But if the deal we do prohibits us from doing these free trade deals, then it was a total and utter waste of time. Because it's out of doing free trade deals and doing more exporting business to the rest of the world that I felt was going to give great benefits to the country. I mean, we're leaders in so many different industries these days, and we have great soft power around the world, that I just figured there was no way we couldn't do better when we had control of our own laws and trade and everything. So that was my reason for voting for Brexit. I had just tremendous faith in Britain, and I thought we could do a lot better outside of the EU. But anyway, that's life. Another story I've got is, Abe claims Britain will be welcomed into the TPP with open arms. That's the Trans-Pacific Partnership. It says the TPP is a wide-ranging trade agreement between 11 Pacific countries, including Japan, Australia, Vietnam, Malaysia, Canada, and Mexico. And I would imagine New Zealand, but I don't see it mentioned there. But as I say, some of these countries are Commonwealth countries, and that's where I thought, well, with the TPP, doing better with the Commonwealth, I mean, surely we're going to do great, or we could do great if we can get these we get the wherewithal to do free trade again. Anyway, I thought that was quite an interesting story. Scottish samurai honour for Japanese PM Shinzo Abe. It says Ronnie Webb OBE is part of a Scottish Samurai Awards delegation heading to Japan, with the highlight set to be the meeting with Shinzo Abe next week. Really good story there. And if you could, Thomas Brake Glover of Aberdeen was considered the Scottish samurai. In fact, he was considered to be the father of modern Japan, because he brought shipbuilding and everything to Japan. And I've got a very good page on the site, so if you look for the Scottish samurai, Thomas Blake Glover, you can read all about him. Next story I've got is responding to Common Weal. The guy says, I read with interest Chris Abel's article in last month's Eich describing the Commonwealth strategy for winning independence as outlined by Robin McAlpine at a recent meeting on Islay. It's Kevin Haig writing from his Chock-a-Block, so I thought you might like to read that. Some Corner for Foreign Field was a story that tweaked my interest. It was a battlefield tour worth making, it says, and they actually go to Vimy Ridge, so for Canadians especially. It mentions about Vimy Ridge and some other battlegrounds in France. So again, an interesting read certainly. Then another one I picked out was Britain should not fear Brexit. This is a CapX story, and I've rated CapX very highly for the quality of the story. So it says Brexit was not a sudden a sudden surge of populism, but the end point of decades of Euroscepticism. And then, for those that are interested, Nicola Sturgeon addresses the SNP conference, and I've got a link to the full speech she made at it. So, for those SNP believers, you've got a chance to read her whole talk there. Then, if Theresa May truly admired free markets, she would embrace Canada Plus. It says hypocrisy, thy name is Theresa May. And I really believe she's just a traitor to the country. I mean, terrible Prime Minister. How she keeps surviving, I have no idea. Obviously, well, let's just say I don't rate her at all. Meet Jamie Genevieve, face on BBC Scotland's new TV channel. So as you know, BBC is doing a new Scottish TV channel, and this is a bit of details about the programmes you can expect to see on there. Then Child Abuse Inquiry says orphanage were places of threat and abuse. Children at Smilan Park orphanage were sexually abused and beaten with leather straps, hairbrushes and crucifixes, the Scottish Child Abuse Inquiry has found. That's absolutely terrible. And if you read last week the article I did for Kenneth Roy on the one he wrote about these two young girls that committed suicide, you've got to ask yourself, what on earth is going on in Scotland? There's something seriously wrong with our social support systems, and we better get it right, otherwise people should be put in prison, like the Nicola Sturgeon and any of these bloody MPs in charge of it. Put them in prison, give them a shock. It's just disgusting what's going on, and I'm appalled. So when you read that, you'll be appalled as well and ask for changes to be made. Then the next story is nurseries fight for survival as childcare plan is challenged. It says flagship plans to provide a system of effective universal childcare in Scotland may be about to implode. Private nurseries have warned ministers. This was a I think that when the SNP announced this, there was some very serious articles about the fact of saying that we haven't got enough childcare people, and if they impose this policy, these childcare people just haven't got the money to do it. And this is really reinforcing the fact that it just hasn't been thought out. It's like it's a wish list, but there's no practical way of delivering it unless a lot more money is put in. But as always, the SNP just don't listen to people. That's what I feel. Anyway, you might want to read that. Popular American breakfast chain Denny's announces its opening in Scotland. I must confess I'd never heard of Denny's, but if it's popular in the States, then probably a lot of you have. But it says fans of the American chain, known for its pancakes, donuts and burgers, won't have to wait much longer as Denny's has announced it's opening its doors in Glasgow. So there you go. Oh yeah, another one I decided to put up was 30 of the best Scottish gins, including the Scottish Gin of the Year. Scottish gin is undergoing a massive revival at the moment, fueled in part by the boom in small craft distilleries and by the arrival of whisky companies into the gin market. Certainly gin's becoming, or could become, as important, if not more important, than whisky. So I thought it was time that I brought you some information on the gin market in Scotland. And then No Deal Fear. It's German and Spanish businesses warn that a no deal would cause a massive crisis across Europe. I thought I'd bring you that because it's from a German and Spanish perspective, but you know, no one ever seems to look at what it would mean for them. They always look what it could mean for us, and usually they get it wrong. So I thought I would add that in there. Then Aberdeen and Aberdeenshire, 3 days exploring Scotland's northeast. This was it was emailed me into today actually, and I had a wee look at the article, so I thought I'd give you a link to it. It basically comes from Avis, who are obviously keen to hire cars, but they're basically saying hire a car from them and here's a 3-day trip you could do exploring, and in this case Aberdeen and Aberdeenshire. Quite a lot of history sites they go to, so I thought you might find that of interest. And there's some beautiful pictures, I will say, within the article. And then the final story I've got up is Ignore the Hysteria. Universal credit is working. This is a big topic. Maybe if you're not in Scotland or Britain, you won't know about it, but it says critics of universal credit forget how bad things were under the old welfare system. So I thought to give you background on it, you might want to read that article. Again, it's a CapX article, so as I say, I highly rate CapX. Okay, so that's the news stories I brought for you this week. Electric Canadian, I'm still working on the same 3 journals, like Canada's provinces. I've got chapter 17 up with starts on the province of Ontario, part 1. The Engineering Journal for 1957 is now available, and the Mining Review for 1910 is available. And then the individual stories I picked up here was basically a couple about food. One is War Food. It says practical and economical methods of keeping vegetables, fruits and meats by Amy L. Handy. This was produced in 1917 during the First World War. And then following that, the following year, the same author did Wartime Breads and Cakes. So I've given you links to both those books, which, I don't know, if you're into food, you'll probably find those kind of interesting. Then I got in the October 2018 newsletter for the Grand Prairie of Canada. Again, some interesting stuff in there, so I made that available. Also, my Canadian journal, I've decided I should add something about transferring from Steve to the Vancouver hosting company, so I put a wee article up there and discussed some of the pros and cons. And then I got a wee note in from Barry Leslie, Australia, about Lieutenant General Andrew Brooke Leslie. He's a Canadian, but a little bit of his genealogy, because it goes back quite a way. So I thought I would put that up. The Dorothy Perkins Canadian Garden Book is another one I put up. It says, a timely and helpful handbook for the amateur gardener, written by a Canadian for Canadians and adapted to our climate conditions. It was produced in 1918. And then finally we've got 3 stories from Conrad Black this week. A showdown like no other. Canadians don't see the Ravenel episode for what it is. And finally the Democrats' Kavanagh Gambit will swing the middle terms to the GOP. Okay, so into Electric Scotland. I'm still working on some of the background information to the RAF, and this is a new one I found, was effective condition monitoring of aero engine systems using automated CMEX and new diagnostic routines. Despite 2 pretty serious players, Mr. Nicholas W. Farrant of Rolls-Royce on engine condition monitoring, and Mr. Terry Lackhurst, HQ for Logistics Command in the RAF. So if you're kind of into that kind of stuff, interesting. These are 1988, by the way, so it's reasonably recent. Then I found a wee book on the Lincoln Fellowship. As you know, Edinburgh is one of the only places where a Lincoln statue has actually been put outside America, and so we have a wee book about him. But this is another wee one. It's proceedings at the first annual meeting and dinner of the Lincoln Fellowship, held at Domenico's, New York City, on Wednesday, February the 12th, 1908. Then I've got Memorial for Archibald Macduff of Ballinloan. This is an old book, 1768, but it's against Sir John Stewart of Grantully, so kind of interesting. Scottish Eccentrics is another book I've got for you, produced in 1936. Basically, he's taking some of the eccentric Scots and just discussing them. Anyway, it's an interesting read, and it's about personalities that you can read about in other histories. Then Scotch Curler's Visit. This is just a wee book. It's basically to welcome old Scotia Suns. So this is Scotland playing in Canada. But it's a wee book in commemoration of the Scots' visit to Canada, and you can read that with the link I provide there. And the kind of final article I put up is 2 old documents discussing possible improvements in the British Army. It's how to reform the recruiting system of the British Army, and invaliding of sick soldiers at home and abroad, discussed. And it's a medical man that actually writes this, so kind of interesting. They're only about maybe 20 pages in length, both of those books, so I don't know, I find it quite interesting. And the story is quite a big one this time. I've taken it from volume 11 of Tate's Edinburgh Magazine, which was published in 1844. And it's part of a series that they were covering called Australian Sketches. And this is by Thomas McCombie, and it's entitled My Neighbourhood. And in it he talks about 4 or 5 people in his neighbourhood, and I think it gives you a flavour of what Australia was like back in these days, which, I mean, certainly in 1844, you still got the prisoners coming out, and getting the freedom and stuff like that, but with that prison background. And he's kind of saying, you know, at the end of the day, money means more than anything else. So if you're a wealthy prisoner, you're looked up to. But if you're not wealthy and you're poor, you're not seem to be deemed to be a nice person. I don't know. But it's kind of interesting, the thoughts and attitudes back then. So it's quite a lengthy wee story, that. But I thought you might like to read that. Okay, and so that's basically it for this week. Certainly I hope you enjoy your week ahead, and I'll keep my fingers crossed the mailing list will go out okay this time round. You certainly don't want 1,000 bounces, that's for sure. Okay, well anyway, nice chatting with you again. Remember, I'll put a link below in the description so you can actually get the newsletter PDF format where you'll get all the links to all these stories. Okay, cheers, thanks for listening.